Everyone, my name is Peter Zovak. I'm the Assistant Director of Community Development, and I would like to officially call this meeting of the Landlord Tenant Ad Hoc Committee to order. Today is the regular meeting of the Ad Hoc Committee taking place on Wednesday, September 28th, 2022 at 6:04 p.m. With that, we will start off with the roll call, and if that, I can remind all the committee members to make sure you have your mics on.
Committee Member Jennifer Schultz-Bertolip. Committee Member Razmik Grigorian.
I'm here.
Committee Member Victor Herpetian. Committee Member Teal Marchand.
Present.
Committee Member James Son.
Here.
Committee Member Isabella Tavanyan.
Present.
Committee Member David Zargarian.
Present.
Okay, with that done, we will go on to the regular business agenda. And we have the report, please.
The agenda for the September 28th, 2022 regular meeting of the Tenant Landlord Ad Hoc Committee was posted on September 23rd, 2022 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Very good. Next on the agenda, we have approval of minutes. The minutes have been provided to the committee members in advance. Are there any comments, questions? And if not, we'll entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve.
We have a move to approve. Second? Can we roll call, please? Or might I say, hearing no objection?
Is there unanimous consent? We could just ask for that.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Moving on, next is oral communications. These are for items not listed on the agenda. There is a 2-minute time limit. Discussion is limited to items that are part of the agenda. Committee members may question or respond to the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. Do we have any callers or speakers in the audience?
We have no callers on the line.
No callers, no speakers. We will move on then to the business agenda, item 5. And item 5 is a continued review of Chapter 9.30. And I'll take a quick moment to reflect that at 6:06, we do have committee member Victor Herpetian present and accounted for. So let the record reflect that.
Thank you.
And again, we are going to pick up where we left off last month, a discussion of the Rental Rights Program Ordinance, and it's Chapter 9.30. Sipon Zadorian will take us through where we left off and move us on forward. And I think I'd just like to take a moment just to say in advance that just reflecting so far the work that's been going on, I know it might seem like it might be tedious, might be long meetings, but we did anticipate something like this early on. That's why we did call for a 12-month committee to be able to get through everything and then be able to get back to it again and look at what we discussed and reaffirm whether it, what we had said, and then also have an ability to get some public outreach and feedback on what we discussed and what we voted on prior to going back to council. So I do think it's moving along. I hope you feel the same, and we value the input and the feedback, and we'll see how far we get tonight, and if it's not tonight, we'll just move on to the next meeting next month as well. So.
Good afternoon, everyone. So last week we discussed the relocation fees for just cause evictions specifically. So we went through a lot of different variations of the fee. I'm not going to go over everything, but today we're going to start discussing relocation fees as it relates to relocation. Sorry, fees as it relates to relocation. So whenever landlord increases the rent past 7%, they have to offer tenants option to relocate. That option comes with a fee. We're going to go through the different types of fees today, and if there's any recommendations on changing any of those.
So to refresh my memory then, Sipon, last meeting we discussed relocation as it relates to just cause eviction,
Just cause
correct?
eviction, and this is rent increases. So last week was just cause eviction, and this week we're discussing relocation related fee.
Whole different formula related to this.
Right.
Okay.
So I think we're going to direct your attention to 9.30.035B.
We're past A, so we're on B right now.
I'm sorry, can we, I believe we have a question.
Yes, for the purpose of the recorder, he mentioned it last week, but it was last month,
I'm sorry.
right?
Yes, last month. Yeah.
Yes.
Time flies. So we're at B. So the way our relocation fee works right now is it's divided up into different types of properties. So if it's a property between 3 or 4 units, the formula is different than a property that has 5 or more units. So number 1 here, it says for rental units located on a parcel containing 3 or 4 dwelling units, the product of fee is actual rent. So basically, it's saying that if the unit, or if the property is 3 or 4 units, then the relocation is the actual rent. It's very simple.
And that was as a result of council's desire to see a simple and smaller formula
Right.
related to small units, mom and pops types?
Yeah, they wanted to give mom and pops a break versus larger property owners. So the fee is a little bit different than the fee we're gonna talk about, 5 or more units. And 5 or more units, it actually breaks up into another category where, with low income and higher income individuals. So for 5 or more units, if your household income is above 130% AMI, the formula is simply 3 times proposed rent. So the proposed rent would be the rent that the landlord wants to increase to. So if your rent is $1,000, the landlord proposes to increase it to $1,200 or $1,500. They have to offer you 3 times the proposed rent, 3 times $1,500, 3 times $1,200, whatever they propose. That's if the household income is above 130% AMI, which roughly ends up being about $100,000 annually. Any questions so far?
I actually have a question. I know that the formula that was agreed to, or that was reached in 9.30.035, involved extensive discussion between the city council members and back and forth with city staff. Do we need to comment on that code section as we sit here today? I didn't think that that was something that we were supposed to do. I mean, they labored over reaching that formula. Go ahead.
The council didn't provide any, committee member Petian, council didn't provide any limitations on your ability to review the entirety of the code. Some time has passed since this was adopted. Your experiences may be different, and there could be a recommendation that offers something else, or maybe there's consensus and you agree to leave it as is.
Right, we did see a difference of opinions and suggestions coming out of just discussing relocation as it relates to just cause. So that's not to say we can have the same type of action here when it relates to just the relocation formula.
Right, yeah, I know that with subsection B, this, I think, was the outgrowth as a result of the rent increases that went above the 7%. And so this was when the termination is initiated because the tenant elects to terminate. It was my opinion that, they spent so much time over that, and we thought that that was a sensible conclusion because they were taking into consideration long-term tenants, smaller buildings, larger buildings, so they kind of had addressed those dynamics. Personally, I'm afraid to almost touch that section because it involved the rent increase-based relocation fees. And unless we touch the rent increase percentages, I almost think we just leave it alone.
I mean, certainly we can hear from other commissioners. If you'd like to move on from this section, we can. Or committee members, rather.
Because I thought last time when I think it was Mr. Zovak that also had proposed a really great alternative with regards to the rent times 2 plus the security deposit, or the FMR plus CPI times 2, and then I don't remember the exact details. But I thought that was, and again, please correct me, all I'm looking for is a definition with respect to our scope. I thought that since that dealt with the renovation types of relocation circumstances, that those are more with what city council was concerned with. I didn't know that they had concerns with regards to the rent increase, excess terminations, which were then initiated by, higher rent raises, which then the tenant elected to go, because it was a pretty arduous process. So that
I would encourage you to look at the section, and if you do not have any changes, we can quickly move on, but the council's makeup has also changed. Some time has passed. This was adopted in 2019. It's been 3 years. Certainly, there may have been changes in the, or different effects in the execution of the ordinance, but we can quickly move on from it if others agree that we don't want to touch this section. In response to your comment, no, council did not place a parameter to say, do not opine on this, just, this is part of your purview.
I would add that they did ask the committee to look at the entire rental rights program, not calling out one particular element over the other, per se. I do kind of understand your comment, though. I think, from what I'm hearing, I think you're saying is that the just cause eviction ordinance formula is something that dates back to 2001, and certainly in need of some type of updating, whereas this particular element is fairly new, and the question is, do you think it needs to be updated in any way? And obviously, in your opinion, you don't think it needs to be, but as we have other committee members representing other groups as well, I think we need to hear all of the comments as to whether or not there's a desire to change any elements of these or propose changes. I would say that this element is probably the most common issue that tenants and landlords are having with each other. I think more so than just the just cause eviction reasons that we went over last month. And these tend to, and Mr. Zadorin, most of the calls coming into staff, most of the concerns being expressed to you all have to do with rent increases and situations that these formulas involve?
Usually they ask if, where they can increase without triggering these formulas, but yeah, it comes up a lot.
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the ordinance did provide that the landlord, should they elect to raise the rent over the 7%, must then also provide the language of the relocation ordinance. Is that being helpful with regards to informing the tenants of what, for any rent increase that would exceed the 7% safe harbor, basically, that, or anything that goes beyond banking? Is that explanation sufficient to provide the tenants with an idea of what their relocation entitlement is?
I think that it's very helpful. We try as much as we can, and at some time later, in a later meeting, we'll talk about public outreach. We try as hard as we can to get the rental rights program rules out to the community. That's not often easy. So the requirement that the landlord also have to do that when it's triggered, I think is a very good benefit to both sides, really, in letting everyone, informing them of their rights.
Quick question. The only comment that I would have made, and this was back, I remember speaking with a council member years ago about this, was when you're going to put the language in the ordinance, sometimes the city provides on its website kind of like a worksheet or another explanation guide. The only comment I would like to see is if we can also have in the language that would go on the notice some reference to a city webpage, if the city staff can provide one that kind of gives them an example, because as you read this in its raw form, it is a little difficult to understand. You have to read it a couple of times, and maybe for some of the tenants that we have in the city, there may be a barrier in some respect, and having a website reference added to the notice doesn't hurt.
More information, the better.
Plus, I also think if there's a reference to a city website, there would be an attribute of credibility that this isn't just something that the landlord whipped up, because most tenants don't know that this is coming from a formal section in the municipal code. So, just a thought.
Mm-hmm. So are there any committee member comments with regards to Section 1, with regards to the formula for rental units, 3 or 4 units?
I want to just back up real quick. In this section, so essentially what the section is doing is saying that if the tenancy is terminated because the rent has increased past the grader, what triggers this section?
So when there's a rent increase proposed higher than 7%,
Okay.
the tenant has the ability to either accept that rent increase or invoke relocation.
Got it. Okay, so once it's triggered, if it's 3 or more years,
Three,
3 years or more, it's 3 times the rent.
Right, I haven't gotten to that part yet, but for properties 5 or more units, yeah. And,
Okay.
and the income below 130% AMI. Yeah, you want me to continue and then we can get back to?
Yeah, we could just discuss the whole section.
Can I make a comment
so-
before you continue, please?
I'm sorry?
You know, I've always been an advocate of simplification. And whatever we do here needs to be practical and understood, simplified by both landlords and tenants. The more we keep on coming up with formulas and things and, you know, at the rent at the time or increased rent or rent prevalent in the LA County median rent and all that thing that we keep on doing, it creates a lot of confusion and therefore a lot of even ill will between parties. Whatever we do, I am absolutely advocating to make it as simple as possible. Let's say if there is an increase, we can say either the new rent or the past rent, and forget about average this, average that, and all the other stuff. Again, we are here to make life easier for everybody and try not to create conflicts. And if there are any potential conflicts between landlords and tenants and their view of the ordinance, we are here to try to simplify it. So, whatever we decide, I really need to see a much simpler and easier to understand formula.
Okay, so with that, if you could, Sipon, take us
All right,
through the
so-
scenarios, and then we'll come back to any area that anyone would like to discuss.
So as I said before, 3 to 4 units, simple formula, 3 times current rent. 5 or more units where the AMI is above 130% is 3 times proposed rent. And then if the AMI of the tenant or the household is below 130% AMI, again, which roughly amounts to 100,000 annually, the formula gets a little bit more complicated. So if the tenant has been there up to 3 years, it's 3 times proposed rent. If the tenant's been there 3 to 4 years, it's 4 times, 4 to 5 years, 5, and 5+ years is 6 times proposed rent. And we don't have anything past 6, so if the tenant's been there 20 years, it's still going to be 6 times proposed rent.
I'm sorry, may I please interrupt? That's exactly what I mean by saying let's simplify it. Because all these formulas, 2 years, 3 years, 5 times, 3 times, 2 times, all of these create confusion. And that's whatever, 10 times. But one thing I would also want to add to this, whatever it is, I recommended last time. If a landlord has an illegal unit, has converted whatever to illegally to a residential unit, then I think that landlord has to pay a bigger amount of relocation or penalties or whatever it is than whatever we discuss here. So I would like definitely to see that an illegal unit, first of all, not to be rented, and if it is rented, then the landlord to see the consequences of it.
I think the illegal unit is a completely different discussion and it's completely outside of this, but I think that others have made similar comments, so in the future, I think that might be something you guys would.
Yes, I know it's a different subject matter, but I would like to make sure that any relocation paid to the tenant also includes a more relocation fee for an illegal unit.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I think there was a caller as well that had an issue of something like that. And since then, staff has been doing more investigation. So that is an area that we do want to bring back to the committee and have a discussion on.
Yeah, I think we brought that up too, if I may say, to your statement. We brought that up because of the caller, Mr. Kim, and what he's dealing with in his situation, and this is where the water gets muddy. When it's like what you talked about as well last meeting. At one point, it's a room I'm renting, but when I rented it, it was an apartment, even if it's a studio size. Oh, but now we found out it's illegal. It's not illegal. It's a room. So then there's no relocation fee because it's a room in a house. Then that's why we had the big lengthy discussion about the illegal units. And I agree that, because let's be honest, they know they're doing an illegal unit. It just can't keep going on and on and on. And they should, the burden should be definitely on the owner, for sure. And like you said, at some point, they start throwing up walls, tearing down walls, and then it gets real muddied. So to be a deterrent to not continue to have it, the illegal rentals are very much a part of this, because people are being thrown out of their house and running to get safe housing because of this.
We will be bringing that back.
I had a question regarding the illegal rentals. Does that include or not include Airbnb?
Airbnbs are under a different chapter, and they are controlled completely differently. And so there's specific requirements about the number of days that somebody occupies the unit, et cetera.
Okay.
And it's
I don't
technically home
expect-
sharing, because the owner must be present and living in the unit, in the property, in the house, while renting out as well.
But I don't think this ordinance includes Airbnb. Airbnb is a very short-term rental, has nothing to do with this situation.
Correct.
The other thing I also want to point out to the fellow committee members is that there's already, I mean, depending on how we're going to treat the illegal units, with the way that I've seen it done in other cities is that the illegal unit is treated with the same rights as though a tenant was in a regular unit if you're dealing with relocation. But more importantly, how far can we comment? Because, for instance, there is a series of cases that the courts deal with, because there's already a legal precedent, I believe it's Carter versus Cohen and a bunch of other cases that talk about how you deal with illegal units from a rental standpoint. So if the law places certain allowances and certain restrictions, and then the city becomes punitive about it, I think that is going to create a bigger hornet's nest, and there's going to be a lot more analysis necessary to get that just right. Whereas I think if we treat an illegal unit such as another unit, if the tenant has other rights and remedies that they can pursue because it's an illegal unit, it's kind of set forth in case law. There's also the flip argument, which is what you're going to get, which is someone's going to say, yes, it's an illegal unit, but you've gotten the benefit of basically staying somewhere a lot less expensive. I'm just telling you what the landlord's position is. You've paid a lot less rent than if it was a regular unit, and you didn't have a problem all this time. But now that the party's over, we got it, let's move forward. And that's, I think, what kind of the case law looks at. So I don't want us to start kind of encroaching on the adjudication side and trying to anticipate all the scenarios. I think it's wise, since we know that there is a concern that in the city those items involving that type of occupancy exists. I think it's good to address it, put it in front of city council, but then also let them make the decision of if they want to kind of go farther than that. So our comment would be is, yes, it's important. Yes, we recognize it. Yes, there should be something done, but how far can you take it? I don't know if that's within our discussion.
I do want to address the comment that came up, just so you know what the reference to it. The illegal units are treated like as if they were, regular units. So typically somebody would be entitled to relocation.
Yes.
In this particular example that was raised, the issue was that the unit did not meet the legal definition of a rental unit because it didn't have a permanent kitchen. And as a result of that, it didn't meet the uniform building code, which the city has adopted as to what a rental unit is. There was the partition was illegal, and as a result of all of that, it didn't rise to the level of a triplex, and therefore didn't fall into this into the ordinance itself. So the code looks exempts duplexes, triplexes are not. That certainly, that definition is something that everyone can look at and comment on.
I agree with that. And in every tenant case that I've represented tenants involving illegal occupancies, and they've given them a little cooktop and said, plug it in, it's not considered a kitchen. We go in with the idea that the court has to act in equity at that point in time. and what was the intent behind that, and clearly it was, you're not just letting someone, it's not supposed to be some sort of a cave with pinball machines and arcade games. Someone's actually going to be sleeping there. So yeah, I agree that what you suggested is excellent. I think we should work that into the definition, that whether or not you have a functional stove or you have a microwave or you have a cooktop, some feature that gives it the attributes that the person is essentially going to be residing there. I think most landlords, in the cases that I've seen, and on being on both sides counseling landlords not to go there, I don't think anybody really wants to litigate the issue of whether they're residing or not when there's a bed and people are actually coming and going. So.
I will again, I experienced it myself firsthand, and it was a nightmare. I did not know when to look at the house. It just looked like a home at the bottom, like duplex, and then they turned bedrooms into studios upstairs. The only reason I knew something was going on and I started doing investigation was because the manager himself said the kitchen above me was not permitted. So I think we also lose sight that when these type of rentals, look, he who has nothing to hide hides nothing, right? So when you're doing a rental, we would hope that landlords would be appropriate in doing their rental. And I was mainly concerned about the safety issue, and these landlords were clueless. I was called every name under the sun. I was the stupid one. I was the ridiculous one. It's not about money. It's not about any of that. I was like, I just wanted like recycling, for instance. And then he said, oh, I found out we can't get more recycling because this house is not considered a multi-unit house. It's a house. Then I was like, huh? So, and to be honest, when code enforcement did get involved, I kind of was taken aback that the inspector said to me, well, Teal, you could have said something before you moved in. I said, wait, what? Wait, I'm the victim here. Like, the onus should be on the person who's renting. We know exactly what they're doing. There was enough paper trail to show what they were doing. Even when they were denied, don't do this, they still did it. Made a lot of money off of a lot of people. And the only reason I sat and dealt with it because I wanted to make change. Because most of the time people do move out and then they can't continue the fight.
But you're one of the few. Because most tenants until there's a problem, most tenants that I see that are in an illegal unit don't mind.
Yeah.
They don't
I understand that.
And so they're looking for a place to live. They understand that there may be an accommodation based on the amount of rent. And there's obviously other financial considerations. But most, if the place is decent, they go, they check it out, it's an ad, they don't mind. It's when the problem comes up that all of a sudden or when you're dealing with a landlord that's truly ignoring health and safety measures.
Exactly.
They don't have a smoke detector, they don't have the carbon monoxide sensor, they don't have the appropriate locks, the windows don't seal, and the storage unit that they've turned into a space
my situation.
is kind of done bad. The other thing too is there an option also?
Can we bring our discussion back to what's on our agenda? Because I think we've veered off quite a bit. I think the question was whether or not there should be further review of situations that are where there's an illegal conversion. And we can make a note of that and return to that at a later time.
Thank you.
Just before we move on, I also think that with the same token, there are quite often tenants make some illegal changes to some units. I think that should be also somehow considered in this discussion. I've had tenants who have changed things that they shouldn't have.
That is typically covered in the rental agreement, and then that's typically recovered through a private cause of action between the landlord and the tenant. So if the tenant has torn down walls or, ripped out, it used to be 2 sinks, now it's 1, that's typically covered within the rental agreement and then recovered civilly between the landlord and the tenant.
Well, that, in the same token, on the other side, it can be applied to the same thing as an illegal unit by the landlord. So what I'm saying is, if anybody is acting out of the law, they should see the consequences. That's basically what I'm trying to say.
Alright, so to go over it again, 3 to 4 units, 3 times current rent, 5 or more units, and where the AMI is above 130%, 3 times proposed rent, and then below 130% AMI, it's 3 to 6 times proposed rent, depending on how long the tenant has occupied the unit. Is there any desire to discuss this section, make any changes?
Yes, I think B1 is, in my opinion, fine. 3 to 4 dwelling units, 3 times proposed rent would be, fine. It's reasonable. Commercial units, 5 or more units. I think my proposal is just to get rid of the AMI definition. Because it causes additional confusion. You have to probably, how do you prove it? You have to provide your tax returns, this, that. I think just getting rid of the AMI, if you're doing 5 or more units, if you're more than 3 years, 3 times, if you're more than 4 years, 4 times, if you're more than 5 years, 5 times, 6, we could figure out the actual, formula, but I don't think the AMI makes sense at all.
So you're proposing then getting rid of the 3 times proposed rent.
So if it's 5 or more units and they've lived in the property for 3 or more years, then it's 3 times.
Regardless of what their income status is.
Correct.
And then if they're in there 4 years, it's the 4 times.
4 times. I'm up for debate on the actual formula, but my proposal is just to get rid of the AMI completely.
Based on what we've seen from the people that come talk to us, the 130, above the 130% rarely applies because most of the tenants that are actually seeking the relocation can't afford to stay there. But for tenants that are 130% or above, usually don't have those problems. So we don't get a lot of calls for people that are making more. So the formula usually ends up being 3, 4, 5 times.
Mhm.
So I wouldn't say that's a bad suggestion because getting rid of it, I think, isn't going to have that much of an impact. So it would simplify things, but I don't think anyone's going to negatively be impacted if we get rid of the 130% AMI.
And you said the 130% is approximately how much per year?
At the time, it was 100,000, but I think it's a little bit more now, maybe 110. I haven't done the math recently.
Total household income.
Right.
But at that suggestion, then, you would be eliminating Section 2A, correct, as well as 2B?
Yeah, essentially, it would just combine into, it's simplified. How Committee Member Gregorian suggested, I'm looking to simplify the section as well, and I don't think the AMI would.
Okay.
Help.
So that'd be a proposal to get rid of 2A and B, and then just go with the straight escalating formula depending upon number of years.
That would be my proposal.
One other thing that I would like to know, if we have any numbers and statistics. Let's say on this case, 130% AMI. Realistically, how many cases do we have a year for this kind of a situation? If it is really few, then I think we are wasting everybody's time. If it is a majority of the cases, then yes, we should really think about a formula that applies to this. But to me, it seems that hardly a few, more than a few. If you have any numbers, please enlighten us.
The thing is, during COVID and when AB 1482 passed, last couple of years, landlords haven't been able to increase the rent past our cap. This is the first year where it's 10% and landlords can increase it past the 7% to the 10%. So this year is where we're really going to start seeing that. We haven't seen it previously because the state cap was so low. It was 5% and it was 8.7%, and a lot of landlords weren't going to the 8 just in case that tenant took advantage of the relocation. So we haven't been seeing it as often, but I think since it's 10% now, we're gonna see that more and more. So I don't have anything right now, but I think we'll have better data towards the end of the year.
I have a question, though. One of the issues that I've pondered is if there was legally no right to assert a rent increase, would there be the ability to claim banking for that year if you couldn't increase? So the idea behind banking was you bank if you're able to raise but choose not to do so. But if you couldn't raise the rent, are you still allowed to consider that year of banking? I didn't think it was.
I'd have to think back. I think our office actually looked into this issue, didn't we? What did we say? I can't remember.
If I'm not mistaken, I think we agreed that it was the banking, we would allow landlords to bank the non-increased rent, because it was a short period of time that they weren't able to raise it, but I can't recall exactly.
It was the hold was for just a few months, right? It wasn't for an extended period of time?
No, I don't believe so.
I thought it was like about a year, wasn't it?
I'd have to see.
The increase?
Yeah, because the idea is if you don't raise it, you can then elect to defer it, basically. But if you couldn't raise it, what are you really deferring? You didn't have the right to do so. So I would take the position that if you couldn't raise the rent, then you can't, that's not a year essentially that you could throw into your banking war chest and say,
I'm going to have to look at that and get back to you, because I think we looked at this issue. I just can't remember the outcome of it.
So, Committee members Zagorian, I was just thinking about your proposal, and the one element of it is that it's, by eliminating 2A and B, you become, at least, if someone were to look at your action and say, and try and criticize it, you become more permissive. Meaning you're not really hurting anyone in this scenario, and actually you're benefiting by limiting A and B and trying to simplify things. All categories of income will get the escalating scale. And so if someone were to try and critique that, that would be a response.
I think the policy, behind this specific section is essentially to provide tenants a little bit of leverage to not have landlords increase the rent past the 7%. Mm-hmm. So if you have, on the one hand, landlord saying, I'm going to increase the rent for that year by 10%, and on the other end of the stick, you have, the tenant saying, I'm not going to accept it, and I thereby, point to this section and say, you owe me 3 times the rent, $6,000, for example, it creates leverage on the tenant side, so the rent doesn't increase past the 7% mark. Right. And I think that's the entire point of this section, at least from my point of view. Right. And if we could create more leverage by removing the AMI, why not?
Right, and it basically treats all the households the same. Yeah. And so it does eliminate another step and does make it easier. Do you agree, Sipon?
Yes.
With that?
Yeah, I like her suggestion. I think based on what we've seen, it's not a lot of people that are above the AMI that are complaining. It's really a lot of people below the AMI, so I don't think the impact is going to be that much to those above 130% AMI.
Okay.
Yeah. If I may make a point also, I am having a little hard time grasping why the difference between 3 to 4 dwelling units and then 5+ units. Why do we allow 3 to 4 units up to 3 times, and then above 5 a lot more? Actually, if you ask me, it may be the other way around, but I think we should just have the same formula for all. But again, that's just, I'm not 100% sure about this, but I cannot really accept that there is any kind of a magic difference between the 2 apartment complexes.
I mean, as far as mortgages are concerned, anything below 4 is considered residential, anything above 5+ is commercial. I think the policy behind it is we're giving someone that has just a 1 unit in the back, like ADU, a break. Those that have 3 or 4 units, you're getting a little bit of an increase, and 5+, you're getting substantially more. So it essentially increases.
But still, yes, of course. I'm really aware of the mortgage situation and 1 to 4 units and 5+ units and all that. I've been in this business for a very long time. The thing is, for the purpose of this ordinance, regardless of everything else, I don't really see if a tenant lives in a 4-unit building and then another tenant lives in a 5-unit building. I don't see why they should be treated in a different manner.
Up for debate.
Well, this goes back to the mom and pop.
And
It's
that's
an
what it gets-
assumption, essentially.
That's
It's
what
an
it gets back
assumption
to. It
that-
gets back to that council thought that the landlords in a 3 and 4 unit scenario should be treated at a different scale and at a simpler scale by only requiring 3 times the actual rent. That was their desire. That was their thinking at that time.
Well, that's a good explanation, but still, I don't see what is the difference for 2 different tenants, one living in a 4-unit building, the other one in a 5-unit building.
The assumption was at the time that one of those units is going to be occupied probably by the owner. And again, it's an assumption. And because the owner is relying on the rents as part of their livelihood and it's a smaller building, again, the assumption was that it would be a strain on the mom and pop. And the better approach would be is to give them a little bit of leeway when it came time to relocating a tenant from that size of a property, purely on an assumption. You can have one company that owns 104-unit buildings, and it still qualifies. But again, the assumption is that more likely than not, you're going to have owners occupying the triplexes, and that's where that logic came in. Whether it's accurate or not, we don't know, but that was the assumption.
That's another good explanation, but still, it's only assumption.
Yeah,
I don't like to put my life onto assumptions.
My bet is that there was some people that probably knocked on council members' doors that probably were within the 3 to 4 unit, and that got someone's ear, and that's why that size of building got a different play to it. My other question would be is since we're also talking about removing, the A and B element of it, what is in that situation, since we're essentially putting this off to the side compared to all the discussions that took place years ago, what would be the reason then to still have this escalation clause for people that have occupied for different years? Because technically, it becomes essentially a relocation situation that's really no different than subsection A. It's a relocation is a relocation. And if it comes from the rent, why not also simplify it further and say, it's one number regardless if you've been there for 2 years or 10 years? Because the counter argument would be is, well, geez, if you've lived there for 6 years and the landlord never raised the rent and now suddenly they wake up or they sell it and they want to raise it, well, didn't you also get the benefit of 6 years of low rent? So why do you get more relocation if I was going to propose the opposite argument? And again, if we're looking for simplicity, just pick one number. Essentially, we did that with subsection A with that alternative provision that we talked about, and there was no differentiation with tenancies that were terminated based on the length of duration of tenancy there. So why not do the same thing for rent-related termination, rent increase-related termination? That would even simplify it further.
I do remember those discussions at the council meeting, and they had their reasons at the time, and it was along the lines that tenants that are in their apartments longer have heavier relocation burdens, let's say, and as a result are entitled to, or should be entitled to more of a relocation fee the longer that they live there, with a certain cap, and they, in this particular case, they capped it at 6 times rent. Similar to Committee Member Zagarian's suggestion, if there's a suggestion to say, well, let's eliminate this scale, 3-year, 4-year, 5-year, and just go 6 times actual rent, regardless of how long you live there, then I would then reply and say, well, that's so permissive, I don't see who it hurts in that scenario, and would be a way to defend a suggestion like that. If you were then to say, well, no, I don't think it should be 6, I don't think it should be 5, I think it should only be 3, regardless of how long, then you start to get into that discussion, or you're really starting to penalize the people that have been living there longer.
I agree with your analysis. I guess my question would be is what study suggests and what information do we have that the longer you remain at an apartment as a tenant, especially, let's say, if you're dealing with a month-to-month tenancy, I know now we have just cause and 1946.2, I get all that. Where is the harm or the additional burden on the tenant based on longevity? Solely based on longevity, okay? If they have a potentially an age issue or a health condition, I get that. But let's assume tenant somewhere, graduated from school or whatever, and they want to move in, and they're living there for 5-6 years, and they need to move, or, they're there 3 years versus 6 years. What difference does that classification or that type of tenant who's there for 3 years versus 6 years, what additional hardship is there on that particular tenant? What are the criteria that we're looking for?
I mean, I can't point to a study, but I can tell you that this specific section is made to protect the tenant. And if you could, like I said earlier, if the policy priority is that you could create leverage on the tenant side to cap rent, not cap necessarily, but to push down rent increase past the 7%, then that's the policy priority. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say I can point to a study, but I think that's the reason.
Let me help shed some light. The discussion that I had with council members at the time was if you're dealing with people that have been there longer, chances are that they're older or there's a reason that they can't move, assuming some sort of health condition.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea was obviously to protect those type of longevity tenants. Somewhere in the discussions, they came up with this 3 versus 4, 4 versus 5. I don't understand. I think this is kind of silly. If at the time, maybe if they had said, okay, anybody there 10 years or more, versus 10 years or less, that I think kind of leads to the conclusion that we're trying to protect someone whose mobility is more of an issue, to get up and just get all their stuff and move out.
Okay, so that's one
Whereas
reason.
if you're dealing with someone who's 3 to 4 years, I personally don't understand what's the difference between someone that's there 3 years versus 4 years. Really? Okay, give them an extra month, fine, but based on what?
I understand that the minutia of the 3 versus 4. I mean, I'm willing to simplify it there, but I also understand why it's gradually increasing.
See, I like your suggestion, which is the 6 goes straight up, makes it permissive. Now, if we were to hypothetically throw something out there, a tenant who's been there 10 years or more, 6 months, chances are that person's probably a lifer or they've been there for a long time, and there's other reasons why they're still staying grounded. I think statistically speaking, people tend to move within a certain number of years. I forgot what that data is. So most people will move, whether acquiring a property, change of job, want a different location, what have you. It's the people that, again, I'm speaking from my own experience, most of my tenant clients that I've gone to jury trial on are the people that are the lifers, that physically moving is a very, very difficult option for them. And if you're going to uproot that type of person, yeah, I would say go right to the 6. Absolutely, no questions asked. But if you've got the young couple that's working at WeWork making 6 figures and they decide to stay 3 years versus 4 years, what's the real benefit to give them an extra month? What's the hardship on them? I don't see that. So I'm just kind of cut to the chase, because that was the council concern at the time, was you're suddenly raising 40, 50, 60, 80% on these rents, and these poor people that are on fixed income and have really almost hardly a source of revenue are now being uprooted. How in the world are they going to do it? And I think, to be honest, this 4, 5, 6 was it's a red herring. I think what they were targeting was you're probably going to be dealing with the newbies up to 3, and you're going to be dealing with the 6 and over crowd. If you happen to have someone in between there, it happens. But I think that's what the city council was trying to protect at the time, based on the discussions that I actually had with council members. So I think if that's the concern, then let's propose that to city council. If you're concerned about the people that are going to be hurt by a move, and that's really the intent behind this, then yeah, cut to your scenario, cut to the 6 times, cut to more, because you're uprooting someone who's really in a genuine hard position. But if you're just dealing with a regular, let's say you're dealing with a landlord now. For 3 years, they haven't been able to raise their rent, but all the costs have been going up. And the landlord says, I want to raise my rent. Let's say Ms. Marpetia comes back and
10%.
says, you can bank it up to 15%. Now we got the state. And they want to recapture some of those expenses. Tenant says, I want to move. Well, the landlord's not going to be able to recapture that at that point, and they're going to have to pay a relocation.
If I may add something to this discussion, usually I have tenants in a building that have been there 26 years, 22 years, 17 years, and so on, in that one particular building, and in others too. And the reason they don't move is, first of all, they are very comfortable in there, and then we have a really good tenant-landlord relationship. I treat them properly, and I don't raise their rent, willingly, frivolously, and they have become part of that building, part of that whole environment. If a tenant and landlord have a relationship like that, all this discussion is going to be, unnecessary. The problem is not everybody treats the other party as well and as respectfully and as fairly and humanely as, hopefully I'm doing with my tenants. And there is no reason for me to make a tenant who's been there for 26 years, although that tenant, I won't even say the gender of the tenant, that tenant is one of the lowest paying tenants in that building. But there is no reason for me to increase that, for reasons I said. But sometimes there are tenants there that you cannot get along with, no matter what, whose fault it is, if it's good or bad. Some people expect a lot more than you can deliver, and then some people have different characters, different approach to certain things, and therefore, they become kind of hostile. I don't see any reason why I should get rid of a hostile tenant, still paying that tenant a huge amount of money that maybe, in my opinion, he or she doesn't deserve it. With the same token, any marriage can be dissolved easily, but a tenant-landlord relationship is not a marriage, but you shouldn't really try to stick them together and hold them together just because there is a housing issue. Because there are nice people and not very nice people among everybody, landlords and tenants. I'm one of the lucky ones. All my tenants are really, really good and respectful people, but once in a while I get that nasty one that I have to kind of try to deal with. But putting all of that into monetary thing and a formula, this, that, then maybe we should start talking about, if the tenant is argumentative, then you should do this, or if a landlord is, a terrible, unattentive landlord, you should do that. Let's not get into all these discussions. This is part of life. Life has all its goods and bads together. Let's just try to find a formula where it is fair to everybody, and it is all-encompassing, and it's very simple to understand. Because if there is not a good relationship between a tenant and landlord, at the end of the day, again, all these formulas are going to be interpreted differently, and really good sources of additional conflict among them. So basically, I'm all for simplifying it again, and I don't see, as my colleague, Mr. Hayapetian, is mentioning, anything 6 years, 10 years, 3 years, it's just, these are just numbers. I don't think these are solutions to a real problem. And maybe the solution is what we have later on in the agenda, to have these forums and the community outreach, and try to kind of ease the understanding of this relationship together.
I think several people up here already gave great suggestions, and then, as we said, we would just present it to City Council for review.
Does anybody else have any suggestions or opinions regarding this section?
When you say this section, are we still on B?
Yeah, relocation. Any other recommendations?
Yeah, I was going to make a recommendation with regards to the payment of the relocation fee.
So that would be the next section. No other discussion on
That's why I asked,
no
I
other
said,
discussion on the scale.
Is it
Yeah,
B?
just a scale, if anybody else, and
On the scale. Then
Yeah.
I'll
There are
reserve
no
my
other-
comments.
Sorry.
if there's no other comments, we'll move on to the
As a
I'm
last,
sorry,
as a
there was
last,
some-
as a last comment, I would really like to see the relocation up to about 5 years to be 3 times rent, and anything above 5, maybe about 4 or 5 times, and that's it. No scale, no different formula, no nothing. Thank you.
So I just wanted to say that there was quite a bit of discussion. I think everyone commented on subsections 2I and 3I. And that's the part that deals with the 3 years, but, not more than 4 times the scale.
Ms.
Is there
Rapid,
any general consensus as to whether that needs to be a single number?
I had a quick question for clarification. Since we have essentially, we're working out a formula for a subsection A, and now we're dealing with subsection B. Are there any issues that would arise from anybody in a different class claiming some sort of equal protection or disparagement with treatment on why a certain group, based on a certain reason, gets a different relocation amount versus someone in a different category would have a different number?
It's not a division based on a protected class. So then, is there agreement as to the subsections of B, 2B, I, 2I, and 3I?
I think we had two major suggestions. One, getting rid of the AMI.
Correct, I
And
got
two,
that. To
having
land on a
one,
single number, but did we say what that single number was? I don't think so.
No.
No, we didn't hear a single number, and maybe if we don't continue not to hear one, we can at least report back to council. There was this desire to see that scale somehow modified to something a little more this or that, as opposed to the different scenarios.
I like Mr. Gregorian's proposal, which is up to 5 years, give it one number, and then above that, a different number. Because again, it also goes back to what council members had expressed previously, which is they assume that the tenants that are beyond essentially a certain year, although it's hard to peg that number, are really the people that they're trying to help because of many considerations that they face as opposed to people that are probably not as long-term tenants.
I agree. Also, does it have to be AMI, getting rid of the AMI, or having a single number, or could it be both?
No, I think both will work.
Yeah, I think both would work.
Anyone else? Any comments? Right, we can move on to the subsection C. This basically just talks about who receives the relocation payment. If there's multiple tenants versus one tenant, if it's one tenant, that tenant obviously gets it. If it's multiple tenants, then each tenant shall be paid a prorate share of the relocation fee. Moving on to subsection D.
Sipon, can you talk a little bit more about what the experience has been when you've had multiple tenants? Are you saying where it's 2 defined roommates?
Yeah, it's 2 roommates, but I don't think we've had a situation where, as of yet, where 2 people have lived together and as roommates and been asked to leave or taken relocation benefits. So I can't say that we've had a situation like that. Adita might know, I'll ask her later on, but I haven't come across one.
Simple way we've addressed that is always deal with relocation as you would security deposits. One person leaves, then the relocation gets paid at the time the second person vacates. They both leave, then it gets paid to both of them. You just make it payable to both if it's one leaves first, unless the first one says, I'm foregoing my relo and pay it to the other person.
Mm.
It's the easiest way to deal with it.
Okay, so moving to subsection D. This section discusses how the tenant is paid, when they're paid. I believe, Committee Member Harpetin, you have some comments here.
Yes, the dynamic that I've seen most that kind of gets thrown back and forth, especially with, say, the city of Los Angeles, because at that point, the relocation benefit can exceed over $20,000, is how that gets paid back to the tenant. Now, here we have 5 days within service of the notice and then 5 days within the date that they vacate. Now, depending on what the final number is, right? Paying half within 5 days may not necessarily help a tenant move. And the goal behind relocation is for them to be able to use the money to go somewhere, first, last, security, whatever. I think that we should provide some allowance that if the tenant essentially has located a unit and says, I need so much to be able to move, even though that might be more than half, that the landlord take care of that additional portion, even though the tenant hasn't vacated. Now, the only proviso would be is I would still deduct any unpaid amounts that the tenant hasn't paid. So hypothetically, if the if the relocation is $3,000 and you have $500, you have $2,500 at your disposal. But I would afford the $2,500 to be paid to the tenant, again, assuming goodwill, people operating with good intentions behind, to that be advanced to the tenant if the tenant presents, an information of, hey, I found a location in, Redondo Beach, and I'm moving, but my landlord, that's a higher deposit or whatever, that the landlord says, great. Some very de minimis way of verifying it, and you get the benefit of your full $2,500, although you haven't moved yet. As long as, again, the accommodation is that the tenant is providing some verification for that. Now, of course, things can go wrong and all that stuff, but I will tell you that in the city of Los Angeles, one of the options is to pay it within 15 days. I tell the landlord clients, you're gonna have to pay anyways, just write them a check, don't deal with the problem. Even in Glendale, when I've dealt with relocations, pay the entire amount within 5 days, no questions asked. Some landlords have a problem releasing that. There's a gag reflex because they feel they're just gonna play with me. But I've also run into a lot of situations where the tenant has come to my office and said, I just can't move unless I put this money. I'm waiting for I'm just started a second job. It'll take me 2 weeks to get my paycheck. So if I can only get that money now, I will move. So I have seen far more genuine tenants that are facing difficulties that additional money would help them complete the process than anybody that's engaging in gamesmanship. So I think we should afford that opportunity to them.
Sipon, do you recall how the one half came up and the second half came up?
During the early discussions with council?
Yeah.
It was mostly for the purpose of allowing the tenant to locate and pay for the first month's rent, last month's rent, start utilities. And so it was so that the tenant would have disposable cash to start the moving process.
And I guess the fear is that a landlord gives the full amount and then the tenant never moves out and they're still dealing with the tenants. Thus the one half before and then the other half after you successfully leave. So I don't know how you couch that.
Let me say this though, I understand that, but any landlord that has paid the relo and the tenant has cashed the check that I've seen, doesn't matter on the city, and that 31st day the tenant's sitting there, you file the unlawful detainer, you're going in with a sledgehammer. Because no judge that I've ever been in front of likes to see the tenant collecting the relocation and not moving, okay? That's the deal, is if it's a valid relocation, you have to be out by that 30th day. The problem with, for instance, with LA, is you still have to pay the relocation and go fight to get your rent. At least Glendale has a sensible alternative, which is if the tenant owes you something, you can withhold that amount, okay? And not have to go chase it. You withhold it from the relocation payment. The only thing I can tell you, and whatever I can contribute to this committee, is my experience has generally been that if you give the tenant the money and they have gone out and they have a landlord, and again, it's basic, hi, I'm calling you, did so-and-so, are they applying? They have an app? Yes, they do. You got a full credit? Yes, I have. I just, they look great tenants, but I got to get them, give them the money, let them go. That will definitely avoid more confrontation. Will you have the problematic tenant that tried to snooker them? Absolutely. But by and large, the masses will be moving. It's more fluid. There's less damage to the unit. You don't know what the tenant is undergoing. There's a stress already to having to move. So the easier you can make and calmer you can make those waters, the transition is usually ends up working out to both sides' benefit. So I would say if the tenant can verify it, and by the way, I don't know who came up with the business days. I think that's silly too. It should have been calendar days. So the minute you give the notice, just give them the money, let them get moving. There's no need to kind of play this tug of war with it. Just put it out there. If it's verified, give them more than half, let them move on with their life.
I would say from a tenant perspective, I don't mind getting all my money early that you owe me.
Yeah.
Now I'm worried about the landlord though, and what
Doing what?
leverage they have in being able to really have that tenant leave and they're still living in my unit, but they need that funding to be able to secure their replacement unit
Right.
if they don't move out and I've given them the money.
I still have to go through a UD anyways. I can't.
But as a landlord, don't you think that it would be easier rather than going through a UD? It'd be easier to just say, I've got some cash for you that I've been holding, half the amount. I mean, of the two, would you rather go through court or would you rather just have this option of saying, I got your other half to try and make sure you leave?
I'll tell you what my solution is, a no fee. If it's a $3,000 relo, I tell my client, pay him $3,500. Give him an extra $500, tell him get me the keys and move on. Guess what happens? Rarely have I litigated those issues in court. I've had one or two, but rarely. If you can get the tenants moving, and again, there's some method of verification, they're gonna go, because I think the tenant really wants to get on with their life. Yeah. They don't have time to sit around and play this game. They got to earn a living. They got to earn a living. They got to feed their families. They got to move on. So if the relo, once the tenant knows that the relo is a valid notice and there's no alternative, it's already done at that point. And as a landlord, if you were to file an unlawful detainer, you submit your exhibits, you can file what's called a summary judgment motion. Usually that will get granted very quickly because those types of cases have almost no defense other than maybe the notice or some issue of service or something. No, just move it along. Get people to get on with their lives.
If I may add to this, first of all, on Section D1, giving the half of relocation assistance no later than 5 business days following service of the notice to the tenant, I think that's absolutely unacceptable. It's ridiculous. And I will elaborate a little later. But let me just tell you an experience I had years ago before all of this came into effect. I had bought a building and there was a tenant that the previous landlord seller had warned me about him, who was not paying rent and was a really problem of a tenant and was not getting along with the seller. So when I bought the building, I just went there and introduced myself very nicely, and I said, I understand that you have not paid your rent for all this time, and I'm going to file an unlawful detainer against you. It's going to cost me, at the time it was about $1,500, I think. It's going to cost me about $1,500. If you leave, I will forgive all your rent and I'll give you $1,000. Which one do you want? Be kicked out and have, I have a judgment against you, or you want to get the $1,000 and leave? Didn't take even 5 seconds. He said, give me the money. And I said, I'll give you the money when you call me and you give me the key. And he said, how would I know that you will do that? I said, well, try me. In 5 days, he called me. The apartment was vacant. He gave me the keys. I gave him the $1,000, never saw him again. So this is one situation that may happen. With even a problematic tenant that the previous owner, seller had huge time, dealing with this person. But when it comes to these 5 days of half relocation fee, in 5 days is enough time for the tenant to even digest the notice and start looking around. I am very much for paying the tenant half, but when the tenant has already found a unit and wants to put a deposit on it. And that way, when the new owner, the new landlord calls and says, hey, has this guy been your tenant, and whatever they search they do, yes. I would be very happy to even pay directly to the new landlord. And that way, this whole other things that, oh, what if he does, what if he moves, what if he or she doesn't move, all of that becomes mute. Because there may be people who will take that advantage of these 5 days, take the money, put that in their pocket, and then they still take their sweet time in moving. And that is not the purpose of this. And then for the landlord to go and start UD and this and that, that's just a lot of headache, a lot of additional extra cost, which is totally unnecessary. And I know that it doesn't happen. Most of the tenants are good, decent, nice people. And they have a normal life like everybody else wants to have it. But one troubled tenant is enough to really sour the whole experience. So I am absolutely for taking these 5 business days following the service away and making it, when the tenant finds a unit, you give them half of the rent, and the day they are moving out and giving you back the keys, again, no more 5 business days. The
How
day
would
they are
you-
moving out, you pay them the other half.
How would you address a tenant that is moving in, say, with their parents?
Yeah, I was going to say the exact
That's a
same
very
thing.
good question. That's a very specific situation that if it arises, then we will say, okay, fine. The moment you move, I'll pay you the whole thing. If you are going back to your a place that you already have, you don't have to pay security deposit. You don't have to pay first month, last month, whatever rent.
Well, see, now you went from simplifying it to getting it complicated. Yeah. So.
No, not really.
Yeah, kind of, sort of, because.
this is a very
we're-
specific
we're-
situation.
We're getting into, we're getting into narrating someone else's
Specific life.
life here. The whole point is, we're gonna take, I do agree, like, let's get rid of 5 business days. That doesn't make sense to me. People need time to get it together, right? But when you give them this money, this relocation fee, it's just, like you said, it's bye-bye. I don't need to know where you're moving. Now, if it's an apartment, if they're going to a place, yes, I really need it, that's a fair conversation. We can't, what we're offering to the rental rights and these policies and rules and regulations, these are suggestions, but nothing in life is guaranteed. We're doing the best we can, So what I'm saying is, I definitely think we should you deal with the relocation fee. I like what you suggested. Just give the people, honest people, will just take the money and literally go. And if he, our neutral person here just also mentioned.
When would you give them that half of it?
As fast as possible.
Yeah, some people, if they can do it fast,
Fastest
I think it should
Before
be.
they find another place?
No, again, the way this, for instance, the way the city of Los Angeles does it is you either pay it all within 15 calendar days, or you can utilize what's called an escrow account or a client trust account and all that. And that's great. I get to make a lot of money writing checks for no purpose whatsoever. It doesn't help. Most people, again, you're gonna have the few that are they're gonna play the game. They're gonna go find the tenant attorney that's gonna say, you know what, I want you to keep me in. I collected the relo. I want to sit for another 6 months to a year. I want you to file multiple federal removal requests and all that stuff. You're going to get that no matter what. And trust me, for the amount that we're talking about here in relocation, if you don't give it to them and they go find that attorney, God help you if I happen to be the attorney on the other side and you don't have the right attorney on the landlord side, I'll make your life an absolute living nightmare, okay? The system is not facilitated right now to, like, let's move it out. So you have to hedge against the fact that most tenants have responsibilities, they have bills to pay, they have a life to live, and they don't have the money to go find lawyers, okay? They're looking to get on to the next chapter of their life. You give them the money. It's like the person that pulls out a gun, not to say that the tenants are robbers, but someone at the gun, on the sidewalk says, give me your money. You don't sit there and say, what was your upbringing like? You just give them the money and say, I got to move on with my life. That's not your job at that point. I've litigated this stuff. Trust me on this. You give them the money, most will move on. And if you give them a little bit extra, which is what I've recommended to my clients, trust me, when the tenant calls the city and says, hey, what's the relocation? And they say 3,000. He says, wait a minute, I think my landlord said 3,500. It's a win. They're not gonna take the extra 500 and give it to a lawyer. They're gonna take the money and move. Now, Give them some money up front. Understand now, if they are delinquent in rent, or they haven't paid expenses, or they haven't changed over utilities, then by all means, sorry to tell you this, but you're just lost part of your relocation from step one. But once that's been clarified, just get it on, because you don't want the tenant to go to the next phase. And once they go to the next phase, you're just walking into a hornet's nest. Just to get into a courtroom nowadays, it's going to take you 3 months, assuming you're right. So what are you going to lose? The loss of rent and all this other stuff, your agony, the attorney's fees. A lot of people out there are demanding jury trials, whether they want it or not. You walk into a law office and say, guess what? My tenant wants a jury trial, minimum $10,000 retainer.
Your agreement should have a non-jury trial, by the way.
You can't do that.
Your
That's-
rental agreement.
You can't. That's illegal. That's illegal in the state of California. You cannot. No, you cannot prevent the right to a jury trial. That cannot be contracted away. So you can't do that. You can contract away attorney's fees.
It's in most contracts.
That's
that-
illegal.
That's fine.
I'll
but it's
happily
in
give
most
you the
contracts.
case site afterwards, but that's
I want
illegal.
to see it more
You
below.
can't do that.
Arbitration fees? Arbitration?
It's an unlawful detainer, so it requires a judicial action.
Okay.
So you can arbitrate other disputes, but in an unlawful detainer situation,
But let's get back to the
Just
point.
in the interest of time, it's 7:20 now. We've spent the entirety of the meeting on this one subsection. It's not even the entirety of the section.
give them
Or
the
actually,
money, let them go.
yeah.
Oh, that's all
So, do we want to get back to the actual code section and discuss whether or not we want to
Well-
make any tweaks?
I would
Can
say
we-
get rid of the business days. I would make it calendar days.
So business days actually just adds more days. It doesn't lessen. So if you get your notice on Friday, then Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday
You'd have to pay them.
versus Friday.
You'd have to pay them on by Wednesday.
Right, but the argument that we were hearing a moment ago is that it's such little time for someone to find something, at least you're giving them a few extra days to find whatever they're looking for.
No, you're giving them the money. So if I gave you a check, you're the
From the
tenant.
landlord's perspective, they're at least having a few extra days to, provide. I mean, I don't care. That's if you want to add that, we can certainly add that in as but that would have been the rationale for why it was
So
business
The
days.
reason I look at it this way is this. Number one, when you give a termination notice and it requires relocation, the relocation is essentially assuming the tenant has complied with the terms of the lease and everything else. From the standpoint of what you have to give them, it's absolute. It's a slam dunk. The tenant gets it, period. So what are you going to sit there and argue and fight over that they don't get it? And you're going to try to offset that as some rent if they should stay again past the 30 days? Again, if you're dealing with the city of Los Angeles, you're dealing with a much substantial number, over $20,000. Even then, because with the 20,000 over there, they have qualified versus not qualified exemptions, what classification is the person. Even then, to avoid the hassle and the expense, I'm trying to give you business common sense here. You tell the landlord, pay the tenant, avoid the confrontation, go to sleep tonight. Go to sleep tonight, This is where people will not come knocking on people's doors. So if you give it to them and the tenant says, I'm not going to move. All right, well, you had 2 extra days, which you'd have to write the check anyway. So what do you gain from it? Nothing.
Okay, I don't think that's a big point of contention. We can certainly add that as you don't gain anything this way or that way, so I don't know why we've spent
Well, the
so much
reason
time on it. We
the-
could just go ahead and add that in, no problem.
The reason I also say that is because you've got these oddball holidays that fall in. And is that a business day? Is it, oh, no, there was 2 holidays. Now it goes over to the weekend. And now, just cut all that stuff out, okay? We as lawyers were having problems trying to count the number of days to schedule a motion until they gave us this long formula of how to do it and which direction you're supposed to count. So make it easier. You're talking about simplicity. You give the notice, 5 calendar days, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, count it on one hand, you're done. Check comes out. And then I would add to what he was saying, which is if the tenant is in fact moving and there's ways to verify it, reward the tenant. Give them more of it. They actually have if the landlord says the application's been accepted, but for the deposit. You know?
I-
So
What
nothing
else do you want?
prevents, the ordinance does not prevent the landlord from cutting the full check or providing additional monies as they go. If all the relationships are as Mr. Gregorian is describing them, then the landlord is free to offer that along with the.
Of course,
So.
of course.
What this essentially does is it paints the actual time when the landlord must pay. So if the landlord does not wish to cut the check, this says, this is where you give one half, and this is when you have to give the other half. So that's pretty clear. But the landlord is free to provide more
Right.
incrementally as they go. I need to turn on utilities, here's an extra $200. I need
That's
to,
discretionary, though, the way it's written
Correct.
right now. What I'm saying is, I'm trying to remove the angst, because guess what? I've also seen situations where the tenant does move out, and they're concerned if the landlord's really going to come through and pay the rest, because once I've turned back the key, how do I know I'm going to get it? Well, there's nothing to put someone's angst at ease than to write them a check. And guess what? Chances are, especially because don't forget, most people want to start their rent on the 1st, depending on when you give your notice. You might actually get a tenant that leaves sooner and says, you know, I paid my full rent, and you know what? The 2-3 days, forget about it. Just keep it. I'm out. You know,
yes, but your two experiences, and just listening to your two experiences, they're very different. Your clients receive cut the check, the landlord clients cut the check immediately. The other experience is that it shouldn't be upfront. Instead, there should be some demonstration of an effort to move. And so you are on very different sides of this issue.
between the two of us?
Yes, because from what I'm hearing him say is that if by the 30th day the person has not given any indication of having found a new place, they're not getting any money until now the landlord starts the eviction process, and now the person's going to be evicted. And they never received the check.
And you do have that. You do have the tenant that makes it
Correct.
difficult.
And so what this is doing is it's got a little bit of a middle ground. You give some now and some later. It checks the goodwill of both parties. Checks the goodwill of the landlord, the inclination to provide the check. It checks the goodwill of the tenant, the ability to start moving. So, I mean, we can definitely take your comments, put them, incorporate them.
I get that.
But I don't know that we need to keep talking about it, because I think we've heard all points of view on this issue.
No, I'm just giving you, again, whatever experience I may contribute from my perspective. I know there's 5 people up here and everybody has their own perspective. I respect that, absolutely.
And I want to add, and the landlord can also just pay in full, right?
Right.
The landlord can pay in full.
Right.
So, I mean, because I did not see it in here, but I would like to add that, can pay in full to the tenant.
I can live with the fact that the landlord can pay at least half or more. That's not a problem at all. But the 5 days is an absolute no for me. There is no reason for the landlord to pay half of or more of whatever to a tenant who has not even started looking, if that's the case. I think the half or more can be paid when the tenant has already practically found a new place.
But in the earlier discussion, we said the tenant can just move in with family. The tenant can decide they're just going to stay in a hotel in an extended stay. The tenant can, come up with whatever situation that doesn't, that doesn't show, that doesn't provide any documentary proof of their move, other than the day before they're going to go, the U-Haul pulls up, puts all their things in there, and they drive up to mom's house.
That's correct. First of all, in my experience,
And yet the
rarely
tenant could
tenants move
potentially
back to.
need the monies in order to pay other bills, in order to get to other situations.
That's
And
fine, I
so-
understand. But anyway, they had to pay those bills anyway, whether they were relocating or not. They have to pay their utilities, their gas, their whatever there is. But the thing is, moving back with parents is almost, in the past 35 years, I've had probably 1 or 2 cases altogether.
We're not giving, we're not giving an
let me
exact,
finish,
though. We're not
please.
giving an exact, we're giving
Let me finish, please.
examples.
Let me finish, please. That is an exception, and we can maybe have some for exceptional situations, and maybe we can discuss that. But overall, 99% maybe, and this is not a scientific number, but 99% move to new digs, if you like, new apartments, new places, whatever. And until they have actually found a place, and the only thing for them is the money, yes, the landlord should pay at least half, maybe more, just to make it easier. Even pay for, for the U-Haul to come and in front of the
Sorry,
building.
but we keep repeating the same comments, and we need to move on.
That's correct. Yes, I understand. But
We've
I
made a
don't see
note,
any reason.
I've made a note of
All
your
I want to
comment.
insist is that I don't see any reason why a landlord should come with half a rent or half a relocation fee, whatever that amount is, to a tenant who has not even made a move.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not talking about that, though. That's not the key issue. We're strictly talking about the relocation fees, and we're not then dictating where the person is going. We're just saying, hey, I need this unit. I'm going to relocate you, or whatever the case may be of getting the unit back. I'm going to here's the relocation fee, period. You have your unit, the person has moved on. That's what the issue is. That's what we're talking about, though.
By the way, one argument that also is made in termination cases is that the landlord waived, changed, or canceled the notice. And one of the reasons that I recommend that they make the payment is because if that is alleged as an affirmative defense, it's much more helpful to the landlord side. So with all due respect, I know what you're talking about, but I've just seen it play out much differently in the trenches, so it is what it is.
Lucy, going back to what you had said earlier, nothing prevents the landlord from giving the whole payment at some negotiated point up front, right? Okay.
All right, moving on to subsection E. This section basically describes the circumstances which the relocation is not going to apply. Does anyone have concerns here? If you do, we'll go through it line by line. Otherwise,
What does it essentially say?
just situations where the ordinance not going to apply, like if there's some kind of government order to, demolish the buildings. If the the landlord has put in an agreement to turn the property into a
So the
condominium.
landlord has applied to convert the apartment into a condo, and prior to the tenant moving in, provides the tenant with notice that, listen, I've started this process. This entire building is going to be converted into a condominium. I'm letting you know now that you may not have access to this unit long-term. And by providing that notice, then the tenant is aware that they're not going to be long-term residents there because the nature of the building is going to change. And as a result, if the tenant is advised of that, and these things can take a long time, if the tenant is advised of the landlord's intention prior to moving in with the expectation and understanding that they cannot be long-term residents, then they would not be entitled to relocation. That applies to number 1 and 2. Number 3 is
Residential manager, if landlord wants to move in a manager for the property.
one resident manager is being replaced by another resident manager. So in that situation, you've got a manager who is technically, as a condition of employment, also has an apartment. If the landlord wishes to replace that employee for whatever reason, then the person gives up his or her unit.
I have a question. I've been involved in litigation cases where the person who's a manager used to be a tenant, and then they become a manager. And some landlords will promote people with the intention of saying, I'm getting rid of a manager, I don't owe you any relocation. In the city of LA, as I have litigated it, it has always ended up being, if the tenant was originally a tenant, unless they moved to a manager's unit where they had essentially terminated the prior occupancy and they went from unit 5 to unit 1, the tenant usually is allowed to maintain the character, and they go back to being a tenant essentially. They don't go out the door. City of Glendale, does that matter one way or another?
Not the way that the ordinance is written
Okay,
presently.
so if you become promoted to manager and then you say, get out, and I need to put a manager in your place, nothing.
Correct, that's
Okay.
what it says. You have an employee, you're not forced to continue to, presumably the tenant would know that, well, actually, it does say, the landlord seeks in good faith to recover possession if the tenant can demonstrate that there was bad faith on the part of the landlord, essentially did that promotion just so they could get rid of him, then the section would not apply.
How long is the bad faith? I mean, that becomes now a tribal issue fact.
Correct.
Okay.
Subsection 4 says, landlord seeks in good faith to recover possession of the rental in order to comply with the government agency's order to vacate the building, caused by a natural, so if there's an earthquake and the tenant has to move, and the landlord is forced to, it has a government order to require the move, then the tenant would not be entitled to relocation. And then the last one is if the tenant is also getting relocation from another agency, then they would not be entitled to double dip.
And that's typical when a agency is buying property and they're required to relocate the tenant. Typically, those relocation fees they would get by an agency acquiring it are extensive, well beyond what we've discussed tonight.
I personally don't have any issues with this Section E, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think they're okay.
Ms. Varpetian, with regards to subsection F, the provision of the relocation doesn't,
We are not on F yet, it's E.
are we on F?
We can move on to F.
We just concluded E.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We can move on
Yeah,
now.
we can move on to F. Basically, F just says that relocation fees will not apply to buildings built after 1995.
And that is Costa.
I have a question. Before, I didn't hear that you passed to the next letter. And the E, some landlords do, they try to say yes to keep for I'm gonna renovate my house or my apartments, and then I'm gonna rent you just for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years.
That's not enough.
Yeah.
That's not enough.
The thing is that if he's saying in advance over here, could you go a little bit down in
To
the E?
E.
Oh, yeah. Notice prior into the writing on oral agreement, those writing on oral agreement about, okay, this is my place, I'm gonna rent you for 1 year or 2 years, but you know what, in this year, I'm gonna renovate and then I need you to move. Some people, because it was a lack of units available for rent, they took it. They don't care about that agreement. Who knows if I'm gonna continue after 2 years, or who knows if this is gonna be extended. So the thing is that it's double stand this situation. Let me finish. Maybe I need you to clarify, because if he goes all the way to 6 years, he didn't do anything. So whenever it comes the intention, so I'm gonna walk out of the place without any relocation.
No, I want to point out something to you that would not apply. I want you to look at, in subsection 1, in the second line, third sentence, that an application to subdivide the property for condominium was on file with the city, or had already been approved, whichever the case may be. So the application has to be submitted already, or it has to have been approved. Not that when the tenant's coming in and the landlord's like, oh, I'm going to, at some point renovate, that's not good enough. There has to be an application that was already submitted to the city.
I was here yesterday to the city council meeting, and it's something like they have project kind of a file with city, and you know how long it's still 6 years, and they couldn't do things. So that is my question. We need to accommodate 2 years, maybe 24 months. But more than that, me as a renter stay there for 6 years, 7 years, and he suddenly, oh, okay, now he's gonna start to build. I'm not gonna get any relocation. You know what I mean? Only in that situation, I'm asking. We
If
have
he
to have
disclosed.
limit.
If he disclosed. If the landlord disclosed.
The landlord would have had to have disclosed it. would have had to have had an application on file. And many times, it's not the landlord's fault that it takes a long time for the application to be processed. You go through multiple hearings until ultimately it gets approved, and then you start the building process. And so these things can take a long time, but the tenant still knew before moving in that they could be in there for 2 years or 6 years. Either way, had the option of not renting a place that was in flux in the process of being changed.
With regards to subsection F, my question is, with the Costa-Hawkins date that we're using, how does that bear in mind with the recent language that's been adopted with the 15-year look back?
Yeah, we'd have to look at that.
What's the reason behind the 1995 mark?
It was state law initially. State laws evolved.
So, I mean, we would essentially have to update this.
Yeah, especially with the recent addition of the 15-year look back.
Okay, so moving on to subsection G. Basically says that the landlord is required to pay relocation regardless of if the rental unit was created or established in violation of any provision of the law. So I think this is where they can start discussing the,
What?
earlier regarding the properties that were built illegally or units that weren't supposed to be rented out but were rented out.
Yeah. So this is the section of code that says regardless if it's a legal or illegal unit, relocation assistance is still applicable. The issue we had with the gentleman that had called and that staff investigated is that unfortunately, his living situation did not meet the legal definition of a unit because it did not have a kitchen. So if the desire is to make it much more inclusive and not to use kitchen as the building code definition of a unit, we can simply do that, right?
I don't know, I just want to share something with you. I heard when he was talking with Glendale Tenant Union, he expressed that he used to have access to the kitchen, and they blocked the door for him. From the beginning, he was using the kitchen, and then they blocked the door with the furniture. Number two, he has a lease, and the lease, it says that he's renting a house. It doesn't say one mini place to sleep, because that is what he was renting. It doesn't say that, it says a house and this address. So they show the address and the lease. I guess we need to pay attention on that. If the owner released a lease, so that is more typical.
Yeah. I would have to say I visited the unit and inspected it, and so as it is, as of my inspection, it had no kitchen access whatsoever. It might have, if it had it in the past, I don't know, that wasn't brought up, but it would still not meet the definition. That does not qualify for relocation, unfortunately.
Did the lease define it as a residential occupancy?
I didn't take a look at the lease, and it probably didn't. It was a very, I think it was a very loose.
Sometimes.
Was there a written agreement?
There was.
As a lease.
So this is where we get into, aren't landlords supposed to have the occupancy, what's the letter? A COO?
Certificate of occupancy, C of O?
CFO.
CFO, yes.
They should have some type of C of O or building permit final approval, yes.
So that, again, that's where it goes to these, if we can stick to, with the landlord and renter, the proper step in the beginning. So this is where, like I said, it gets real muddy. And I understood the information that you said, how it doesn't really legally, and we have to respect that also, the law. But here's where we're saying, but in this case, because what is happening is, of course, now we have the harassment from the landlord basically thinking they can do anything they want with this tenant. And I think there should be some kind of penalty. So the way I'm looking at it is, in my opinion, the landlord being at fault anyway is, I always ask everybody, what is your end goal? What is your end goal if I've worked with the tenant myself in this case? If you want to move, then move, but the burden is going to be on the owner because now you've been caught. This is what you've been doing. You have to pay city fees, fines, or whatever. But I do think, and we spoke about this last time, there needs to be, in my opinion, some kind of fee.
So I would just caution everyone on speaking to a specific case because we don't really know what his situation is. He certainly has rights beyond what the City of Glendale Municipal Code offers and may have the ability to consult a lawyer and deal with it and find other state protections that are not in the City of Glendale. We can't give him legal advice. That's something that he needs to seek out on his own. And so I would just say that we did thoroughly investigate the case. The question before us is, how should we handle an issue where you have an illegal conversion of a unit? And so if it meets the definition under the Glendale Municipal Code of a rental unit, then what the code currently offers is that individual would be entitled to relocation benefits. That's if the unit size and the unit makeup falls under the protections of the rental rights program generally. So keep in mind that the program offers protection to 3 units and more. And regardless of whether or not the individual, the unit was built legally or illegally, then, and I think there was an example that was brought up before, which was, and this may be something that we account for, you have an illegal conversion of 3 units, and the landlord brings one of the 3 into compliance, and now you've got 2 other units, and now it's a duplex. Does that still receive the protection? The answer to that at that point would be no, because duplexes would not, at that point in time when the enforcement is taking place, there would be no protection. So the question is, how is it that you'd like to address this issue of illegal units, and do you want to make any changes to that particular section?
Let me
Of
ask you,
course.
why does it have
Sorry.
to be?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I want to address what my colleague Gregorian was saying all the time. This is an opportunity for us to implement this with the illegal. I don't care if you're gonna say 2 duplex and it's not 3 and they make it happen. They need to be penalized. They need to be paid high. This is the only way. When it touches to your wallet is the way that they really think about to do it again, those kind of illegal business. So this is our time to put something over here.
I would like to, I don't understand why it has to be above 2 units, for instance. I'm not sure why that's the criteria. And then also, I feel if a lease has been given, it is a rental unit, period.
Lucy, would we be able to say something like that? Not specifically if a lease has been given, it's a unit, but not go by the state code for definition of unit.
It would get messy. I mean,
It
I
would
don't
get
know how
messy.
we would be able to enforce something if we're defining a rental unit as, I mean, the issue was, well, why do we limit this to 2 units or 3 units? I think what she's proposing is that the requirement that the program be limited to 3 and above should be eliminated when the
Unit is illegal.
yeah.
I would agree with that. And I do really understand how, I mean, it makes sense with the law. I mean, that just makes sense to me. It is what it is,
I'm not
If-
saying get rid of the 3 or more units, it's just the current situation where the unit's specifically defined as something having a kitchen. Is it possible for situations where,
Is your mic on?
I'm just not close to it.
More people are practicing this.
For situations like the one we've had where there's no kitchen, can we define specifically that and say if a unit like this is rented, they're still applied to this section of the law?
So the difficulty in that is the way that the conversion had happened was that there was actually a fire code issue because of the blocked egress. It would be tricky to come up with a definition that encompassed a situation where the person wasn't living as part of a single-family unit and just renting out a room, which essentially this was, and coming up with, something else. Like, it would be difficult to define that.
To separate a room
But
versus.
again, these types of scenarios are typically worked out in court.
And there is another thing. Maybe if it is not a legal unit, then even the lease agreement is illegal or void or null or whatever. And I don't think we are in the position here to decide that. That's, as Ms. Varpetian is saying, is for courts to decide. But for us, we can kind of touch the rental issue between the landlord and tenant. But if the unit is illegal, then what is the lease agreement about? That agreement is already
Voided.
illegal, void, in my opinion, and I'm not even an attorney.
It is, and there's a case that cites that.
Yeah.
I think he mentioned it.
Something like this, Lucy, if code enforcement goes out and cites it as a illegally converted unit, then the tenant has rights to relocation?
Okay, so in this situation, there was no illegal conversion. There was just a blocked door. That was it.
Technically
Well,
conversion.
Yeah, I would say that's an illegal conversion.
There was illegal work done, but there was no conversion to a unit. It was still part of the main home.
But was
Well,
it
no,
all
was done in a way
permitted?
that separated the rest of the house. There was no physical way for that person to go there. I would say it was a conversion.
Again, it'd be difficult for me to opine on that. I haven't seen it.
Mm-hmm.
From the description from the building official, it was something else. So,
Oh, the building official didn't go out.
no, my discussion in theory with the building
Oh,
official as
yeah.
to what a unit, again, not speaking to this case specifically,
Uh-huh.
but generally speaking about how a unit gets converted.
What about just generally? If it's been deemed an illegal unit, it's 3 times rent. Relocation.
That's what I've been
Well, that's a
saying.
proposal that's coming out of,
Yeah.
I think, one of our committee
Right.
members.
Because I think it also, like we spoke about, it also will, maybe an owner will think twice about what they're doing, because some rentals, in case in point was mine, this looked completely legal until I kept finding little things and I just tried to get out. So I think what you were saying was, perfect. That's what we were talking about a month ago.
Okay, so then rather than try and fit an illegal unit in some definition of the building code, let's just separate it and say, all else aside, if it's an illegal unit, it's just 3 times.
I like that.
Rental space, period.
Mm-hmm.
Even, sometimes
Yeah, but,
rent the closet for you to live over there.
right. But I'd agree with Sipon, though, it should be something where it's been deemed by the city to be illegal. And not just a tenant.
Actually, I would add to that and say if it is something that is determined by the city or the building official that it is an illegal unit, then it should be 5 times the relocation or something like that.
These
I mean,
these
that's-
cases are so fact-driven that it requires testimony under oath for a judge to make a decision.
Of course.
Whether someone is occupying a room or occupying an illegally converted home just becomes very much fact-specific. It would be difficult to say if the person was there as a roommate, using the kitchen, using the common areas, and then all of a sudden was no longer able to do that. When did that relationship convert from a roommate situation to a tenancy would be difficult to say. So the idea of the single-family units and the way that we've been handling those with the roommate situation, that it opens up the door to further discussion on that. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't talk about it. I'm just saying that it opens up a whole can of worms, and the city can't be in a position to make the decision as to whether or not the person was there as a roommate, listen to, the landlord explain, oh yeah, we were, using the space together. Tenant says, no, we weren't. We're just not set up to work that way. So that's why we look at the definition. Is it a rental unit? In, certain situations, the definition answers the question. Now, whether or not, to Sipon's point, is the definition too restrictive? It could be, and so how do we address that? Or alternatively, is there a different mechanism where, the landlord, is required to provide information about, rentals in a specific way? Maybe that addresses the point. But, it's up to the committee to come up with creative ways of how the city, without listening to, without acting as the judge, we cannot be in that position of who's telling the truth and how the relationship evolved. We just can't be in that position. That could be a mediation program, for example. That could be a registry program. It could be a whole host of other things, but not one where the city staff is making a qualitative decision of the relationship between the landlord and the tenant.
Well, what you just said is completely true, and I agree with that. I just want to see just open a different perspective to this. What I think we should do is only based on the city permits and building department permits and all that, zoning and all that, we should just either that unit is a legally built unit or is not. Whatever else is the relationship between two different tenants and the landlord and tenant, roommates, whatever, yes, that is what the courts will decide, and maybe a mediation or arbitration or whatever if we come up with that kind of a group. But generally speaking, I think we should really be very tough on illegal units and make sure that people do understand, landlords especially, that having illegal units converted into some kind of a residential area has consequences. That's basically what I'm saying. But whether in this specific situation that we are all aware of, that the gentleman called and he had problems and whatever happened, Mr. Zovak visited and all the other stuff, that is a very specific situation. However, again, I think overall, if a unit is illegal, then it has to have consequences. That's basically what I'm saying.
We're, I think, approaching the end of our meeting, and this may be a good place for us to stop. And actually, this may be our first homework assignment for the committee to come back with suggestions on how they would see illegal conversions or illegal rentals being addressed, and what sort of a recommendation you would like to give. If you have good examples from other agencies, we
But I
would
would
welcome those.
also like to see if they're going to convert, like, I don't have a problem with the landlord trying to increase income, maybe provide housing as well for someone, but when you're, let's get things permitted, because a lot of things are safety issues. Like how I had 3 kitchens attached to my house, that I rented at one point. What? Like, it's also safety. It's not just trying to get people in trouble. It's, can I just live comfortably and safe? The other thing is they need to have I believe, the certificate of occupancy. Okay, if you're going to do this, if we don't have a rental registry, provide a certificate of occupancy that you're going to have. We need to know that this one room that you're doing is being rented out, and not just a bedroom. I'm really not thinking of the bedroom. I am thinking the illegal rental where you literally added a wall or did something to divide the house, that you literally provided a studio. Because in extended stay places, you don't have kitchens as well, and they're still, to my knowledge, they're still represented as an apartment.
So your suggestion is that at the time of rental, a landlord present a certificate of occupancy to the tenant?
Well, don't they have to get that through the city, a certificate of occupancy? Don't they have to get approved for that, to show that they're renting something?
I think once you get it, I don't know that you keep going back to
No.
receive it.
No, you
just-
do not.
Yeah.
No, you don't, and I think that's.
Just something that
really-
shows that you're able to rent this.
No, I think we should just rely on the landlords and tenants, especially landlords' so-called goodwill, because and good faith, because otherwise, there are many buildings that are really old in town, and most of them, their certificate of occupancy, of course, exists, but it does not comply with the current rules and regulations. It is non-complying and all that, but still it exists, and it creates a huge can of worms and another burdensome responsibility for people.
We're talking though specifically for the illegal.
Yeah, for the illegal ones, if it is illegal, there is no certificate of occupancy anyway. If it is
Right, that's what I'm saying. They should be able to, they should apply for that.
but if there is.
I think what you're saying is that a certificate of occupancy should be applied, should be given uniformly, and if there isn't one, then they're not going to be able to meet the requirements of the
Exactly.
code.
You said it perfectly. Yes, thank you.
If the tenant asks for it, maybe the landlord should get it, but it shouldn't be mandatory for every landlord, for every unit to have a proof of certificate of occupancy, because that's just
No, we're just going
ridiculous.
back into saying, what you were saying, if we want to somehow deter the landlords from doing the illegal rentals, okay, you want to partition your home or do whatever and rent it out, but do the proper things to get it coded, up to code or what have you, so you can rent it out, so then we're not saying, oh, this is illegal and this is illegal, and you're paying $2,000 rent, you're charging $2,000 rent. I knew of a unit that the people had to go outside and down in the basement to use the bathroom. They accepted it?
Again, let's maybe pause here and come back with some ideas about how we could bolster that section. I hear that across the board.
Yeah, good idea.
Okay. So I thought we could push through and almost finish this, and I think there are a couple of sections following this that were going to be subject to discussion as well. So I think it is a good stopping point. And as a result, let me just check, no callers, I take it. No callers for this item, so we will also then again move out the other item we were going to discuss, which was the public outreach, and we'll move that to the next meeting as well. And so with that, we will complete item 5. Item 6 are any ad hoc committee members or staff comments. The only comment I have is that we'll be back here again on October 26th, I think I had written down, for our next meeting. Correct? Okay. And nothing else. Any ad hoc committee members' comments?
I just want to make sure that we do receive the committee, any emails that are coming
Yes, we've been
in
sending those, yes.
to us. Yeah, any emails from tenants or what have you, landlords as well, that we can review.
After the meeting, we can talk.
The meeting. Don't open another one.
Next is no other business, new business, which we have none, and then if not, we have adjournment. I'll entertain a motion.
I have something else.
Oh, okay.
I received outreach and education. I know that we didn't touch today, but this outreach and education slides, for next time, they could bring like community meetings on Cerritos Elementary School, just for example, on July. How many people they show up, what was the problems that they presented on that meetings. It could be a little helpful.
Okay, we
Yeah.
can be ready to talk about some of that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next meeting is
October
October
26th.
26th.
Fourth Wednesday.
Have a motion to adjourn?
Before we adjourn, can we, this outreach efforts
Yes.
was something very important, I think. I would have really liked to hear it today, and that's fine if we are postponing it to the next meeting. But let's just take it very seriously, and I would really like to see that we actually do organize some community outreach programs, and we go, we even in some of our community centers have some meetings, because I think it is very important to have a discussion and some kind of an education, if you like, in inverted commas, for all the landlords and especially tenants to know what their rights are and what they are expected to do.
So what we're going to do is, what the plan is that we're going to discuss with you and explain and outline some of the outreach that we've been doing to tenants and landlords since the rental rights program started, and tell you what our experience was for each method of education that we were doing. And then we hope to get some feedback on that, and then combine all that stuff when we are doing our outreach on the recommendations that you all put together and finalize, to then get more people to come in and comment at the meetings. So yes, we will be doing that.
And also, the census on 2020 question was about if this is rented, how much you pay your rent, or how many people live over there. Do you use this information in Glendale?
We do. It's somewhat dated, though.
Could you bring?
Being that's 2020, but we've used it in materials in the past.
So it will be helpful to see those numbers as well for us.
Sure.
Please. Thank you.
Yeah, all I'm saying is let's try to speed it up, and also we don't really need to wait for all these discussions to finish before the next outreach, because there are many other things that we can discuss with the community while we are still having a work in progress.
Sure. So we won't, what you're saying is don't wait till the very last meeting to try and implement some of the outreach.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah,
And I remember years ago that the housing department approached me, and I had several meetings with community members, mostly tenants, and I think those meetings were very fruitful and very helpful for everybody to understand, what exactly is going on. So I think I'm very much for it.
Very good.
All right?
So motion to adjourn?
One last question. Sorry about that. Because I am part of the Glendale Tenant Union, we receive a phone calls too with people that they say that they want us to present. I don't know if we are allowed to do that. What is the next coming up projects where they can register, those kind of places for participate on those new low-income or mid-income next future units available that is going to be in Glendale?
So we do have one project coming up that will be opening up its waiting list. We're still working to finalize when that will open up. It's an affordable senior project. What I can do is, once that's finalized and that flyer by the developer is prepared and we start doing the marketing, I can certainly send it to all of you, and you can forward that on to all your contacts.
Yes, as an educational part of the landlord-tenant committee. I mean, another thing that they said that, I don't know if I need to say it in front of the people, but it was something very disappointing to me. They say that some people are asking her that if she wants to get one of these, she need cash in front. And I don't know where she need to go to place kind of documentation.
I would encourage them to contact CPON
Okay.
with any written information that they may have.
Yeah, because somebody asked for money to be in the list and win one of the apartments. Yeah, and this is very sad. Thank you.
Besides Glendale, Hawkla is having their Section 8 program open next month. I think it'll be the 17th.
Yes, but there's no information yet to be able to give out to the community. So yes, CPON is correct. The City of Los Angeles Housing Authority announced that they will be opening up their waiting list for their Section 8 program. And we're waiting to see what some of the details and requirements are. Typically, every agency has a residency requirement, so priority given to those that live or work in Los Angeles type of thing. But that shouldn't prevent someone outside of Los Angeles from applying, because eventually they'll get down to that, the bottom of the list to serve them. And so we'll also send that information out to the committee members as well.
I just want to say publicly, because I don't think by the time our next meeting happens,
Right.
it'll be closed.
Same thing with the other project I'm thinking about. It's only a 2-week window, and so it'll be open and closed by the time you have your next meeting, which is why I will be sending it to you via emails to you all, so you have that information to distribute. And then we require that the developers market it as well. and we'll make sure the tenants union gets it as well.
Just one note, I would really like, if it is in your power and privy, to try to expand the Section 8 help as much as possible. And I don't know what the process is. And I do understand, there are many issues in there, but the demand is so much and the waiting list is so long, and, I would really like to see people who are in need get as much help as possible.
Unfortunately, the demand request goes to President Biden and the administration and all the previous presidents. For the longest time, we've been frozen at 1,592 vouchers. But just today, we got an email from HUD that said they're issuing out an additional 24 vouchers.
Wow, that's great.
After 20 years of being at 1590,
But is there any way, the basic...
There is no way.
Is there any way that housing authorities in different cities can get together and maybe put some kind of a collective request?
Been done and denied.
Wow, that's very
We're
disappointing.
really at the mercy of the federal government and being able to allocate, because they won't
That's
just allocate to
very
one.
that's
They'll have to
very
look at how they
disappointing.
can allocate to everybody, and that becomes cost prohibitive.
What about we can shop around other cities that they have extra vouchers and they
They
can
don't.
they
There's
can add.
no city with extra
No extra
vouchers.
vouchers.
I believe Simi Valley, they told me that they have Section 8 opportunities. So
Wow.
we are always civilian those numbers around? Yeah, it's very important because this meeting are people that they are watching, and it's important if we can give as much information we have. One last, this kind of opening for these new units available for senior or for low income, whatever is the case, can we add a slipped paper in the electric bill? Because everybody gets the electric bill at home.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, no, because the window of time on these projects, they're only advertising and accepting applications for a 2-week period of time. The billing cycle on their electricity doesn't fit any of these projects, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move.
I move.
Move, second.
Everybody moves.
Very good, we adjourned
There's no
at
second.
8:10.